Welcome to Wadsworth History on Film, a program presented by the Wadsworth Area Historical Society and designed to give the oral history of Wadsworth for posterity. I'm Caesar Carino, your host, and our guest today is Tom Cox. This is Tom's second time back because he has such a rich legacy. And the second reason that Tom's here today is that we've had so many people who have called and said, you know, Tom Cox did this and did that and did the other things. He didn't mention any of them. So I'm going to try to pull these out of Tom. Tom's a difficult person to get anything out of because he is so humble, but we'll try our best. Tom, when you were here the last time, you told us about your early days in the city and told us about your ancestors and so forth. And today we're going to ask you a little bit more about your ancestors, but we'll do that later on. You go back several generations, what, 3 or 4 from you, isn't that right?
You mean from where they started here in Wadsworth?
Well, yeah, the ones who started.
I believe I'm the 5th.
The 5th generation in Wadsworth.
Yeah.
And then you said that with your grandchildren, that makes 8, right? Or great-grandchildren?
Yeah. No, I just have grandchildren. I don't have any great-grandchildren yet.
Then that's 8. So you probably have been in Wadsworth, or you know, your roots have been in Wadsworth longer than anybody else's that we've had on the program. And we want to hear a little bit more about that, but we're going to talk about Tom Cox now. Tom, we left off sometime the last time that we were together. We left off as you were working your way through the Holmesbrook lumber. And you had mentioned at that time that it was right after the war, lumber was hard to get and so forth. Could you tell us a little bit how that evolved then, so that when the new developments in Wadsworth came about, people who live in Wadsworth now think that these developments were always here. But you know and I know that Highland Heights and High Point and Far Avenue and all of those other ones were nothing more than a great big farm. As a matter of fact, part of that farm was your great aunts, or your aunts.
Oh yes, the one that I live in.
That you lived in. So tell us about that part of the history, and tell us about the transaction between Grace Kuntz and a developer and so forth. You know, that's very interesting and certainly an integral part of Wadsworth history.
Well, I'll try to go back without exact dates and so on, but in the early 50s, we got to have what I want to call it, zoning and planning, things like that. And I remember Fred Allen, who I think the Wadsworth Land Company bought the Howder farm.
Tell us who Fred Allen was and what he did and what his significance was in the transaction in land.
Fred Allen was in the Allen Hartzell Dibble firm.
And he's what, the grandson of the original Allen?
No, he was the son.
Oh, the son of the original.
Louis Allen was
his father.
Yes, along with the Hartzells. They started the Allen Hartzell Dibble, which is still there on the square, one of the few companies that are still there.
But they now call it Allen Hartzell, right? Allen and Hartzell?
No, I think it's just what is it now?
I think it's Allen and Hartzell.
Allen Hartzell, yeah, the Dibble part is not there anymore. But anyway, they purchased this, and I remember Fred was, he was against all this zoning and
didn't like that,
layouts. They did, you know, if you'll notice up on Highland Heights, now that's the area north of 261 and east of High Street, called Highland Heights.
And that was the Howder farm, right?
Yes.
Fred Howder?
Fred Howder, and I can't think of the other one right now. But at any rate...
George?
What's that?
Was it George Howder?
No, I'm trying to think of the other farm there. But at any rate, they purchased this land.
Was that the Browse farm?
Well, that's a little farther
east, okay.
But anyway, back to Fred. He kind of fought all these things, these restrictions that was put on. And I just have to bring this up, and then eventually he moved to Naples, Florida. And what he did, he wrote back to Wadsworth to get their planning. It was much better when he was on the other side of the fence there. But anyway, you had the extension of Highland Avenue, Woodland, and Crestwood. And if you ever notice, you don't see any garage doors in that area.
That's right. Why not? Why is that?
Well, they decided that that would look good without having an open garage door on the street side, so they put them in the back or in the side. And so if you ever noticed, that did happen. But Fred, the streets were all paved then. We weren't going down to the match company and buying cinders to make the streets like they did on West Street, and then they eat up the
Concrete.
not only the concrete, there wasn't any concrete then, and would eat up the water lines and
Oh,
things
that's
like
right.
that.
That's right.
Remember
See, yeah.
that? But anyway, those were built, and we went up, I think, to Hall Drive to start with, and then eventually went up further to Browse. And so that's what happened in the 50s.
While we're still on Highland Heights, how was it arranged that part of Highland Heights is in the city and parts in the township? Who was involved with making those kinds of negotiations?
Well, as I said, they went up to Browse, and then nothing happened for a long time, and the rest of it was in the township. And as I recall, people still wanted to build there, but never wanted to come in. So they did extend the water and the sewer. And they don't do that anymore. If you want water and sewer, you come in the city now,
right,
because they saw the fallacy of that. So over the years, different people would say, well, we'd like to be in the city. And the people against it would say, well, what do we want to be in the city for? We get our streets plowed first and get the snow off. Didn't make a difference. They could only go as far as Highland Avenue or Browse anyway, because the city hadn't got up there. But anyway, they liked that, and they had the use of all the city facilities. They have the sewer, the water. So they said there really wasn't any. But many times they have gone through with a petition to come in, and then somebody'd say, well, I'll bring it on or pass it to the next one. And then it laid there on the kitchen table or something.
On the kitchen table, right.
Then that's as far as it went. So that's how that happened, as I recall.
Was Holmesbrook Lumber heavily involved with the construction of Highland Heights?
Well, we were involved as much as we tried to sell the lumber and things to the contractors, but as far as development, no.
Do you know how many houses were built in Highland Heights?
No, sir, I don't. It would have been a good thing to count those things, so there must be close to 125 or 150 houses.
Probably at least that many, if not more.
If not more.
But that was one great big open field.
That's right.
Before 1950. Then what about High Point? What was that? Now you're much more intimately involved with High Point through your aunt, Grace Coons.
Well, High Point was developed by Fixler's, another real estate developer, and it took in 3 farms. You had the Fiscus farm, which is close to McAnlis.
Right. Which Fiscus was that? That's not Homer Fiscus.
That's not Homer, but it was, of course, a relative.
A relative of Homer
that,
Fiscus.
yeah.
Homer Fiscus had a garage on Obel Street.
Yes, I just was reading something about that in the City of Wadsworth celebration here, 175 years. And then there was the Wookter farm, and then the Kuntz farm. Those 3 are the ones that hold the High Point development now. You go down High Point, and to the left, that would have been the Wookter. Really, just the Wookter part of the Fiscus farm would be over on the other side as you go down Tanglewood, because the Don Young property abutted that. So that goes down and was developed, well, part of it's been developed by the Premier Homes and, oh, for heaven's sakes.
Kovac Realty.
Kovac Realty. So that goes down into Tanglewood, and then over on High Point was a part of the Fixlers. Mrs. Kovac worked for Fixlers at one time.
Mrs. Kovac, Darlene Kovac,
Yes.
who owns Kovac Realty, worked for Fixler's
at one time.
Fixler's was a real estate agent, right,
Yeah.
in Wadsworth.
But
Which
anyway,
Fixler was that?
That's, well, this was Tom.
Tom.
We jump around, but Clay Fixler, his father and Tom, they also developed Westview Acres.
Westview, which is down west of town and south of College Street.
Row, yeah.
Right.
So they had the Parkview, Westgate allotment.
They didn't, I thought they called that the Ringer allotment. How
Well, it
does,
was the Ringer allotment because that was their farm and
their
orchard.
farm? The Ringers had a, in addition to having that farm, the Ringers had a frozen food locker there too, didn't they?
Yes, they did. And they also had the Ringer Dairy many, many years ago, which is, we're jumping around, I realize that.
No, that's
down,
good because we
down
need to-
on Oak Street.
Oh, I didn't know that. They had a Ringer's Dairy on Oak Street.
Yes, at the end of Gordon. Yeah, Gordon and Baird in that
Okay,
area.
then we forgot about that one because we named, in one of the previous shows, we named 6 dairies, but I don't think Ringers came up.
Well, they weren't as much of a dairy as they were just the farm and getting the milk. I don't know if they had pasteurization and all that.
I see.
But,
What was Mr. Ringer's name? Do you remember?
well, I don't remember Owen's father, but Owen was the one that did most of this.
Did it? Where was the food locker located? What's there right now?
Bob Balt's, can't think of what he calls his place, but it's just west of
The ball field.
Bradley's and the ball field and across from the Stop and Go.
Right.
And it's that big building there.
Big building, and that was a frozen food locker. And then you say that Fixler's started Parkview and which other street?
Westgate.
Westgate. They did those streets. So the Fixlers then were heavily involved with development of Wadsworth in the 50s.
Very much. 50s, 60s, and of course there's 70s. They're still
Still going.
still going.
So we had 3 major developments at that time. We had the Fixler allotment, which is west of town and south of Broad Street. Then we had the Allen allotment, which was Highland Heights, which is
Wadsworth Land Company.
Wadsworth Land Company, which was east of 94 and north of 261.
61.
And then we had the Fixler Company again, or the Fixler Agency again, coming in and doing Highland, High Point, which includes Tanglewood and all of those other streets.
Yeah, I don't know whether Tom had much to do with Tanglewood, but on High Point he did. That's where he lives.
On High Point. And then the Kovac Realty was involved there as well.
Yes.
Is there a story about a piece of property that your Aunt Grace owned that was landlocked? Do you remember that story?
That's landlocked. Well, the only place I know that really was landlocked was the part that she was going to give to the Kent State University extension.
And
That was really-
what happened to that?
Well, just not too long ago, the Stone family bought that, which is on River Styx Road, and then comes east. He owns an awful lot of land there.
And in other words, this was not where Highland Heights is.
Oh, no,
This
no,
was in the
this-
Coos property by the hospital, by
That's
the
correct.
present hospital. And she was going to give that to Kent State University. Kent State actually had a branch campus here for a few years, did it not?
Oh, yes.
And she was going to give that so that they could expand it. Then in about 25 or 30 years ago, as I remember, the University of Akron was able to get the Orville branch, and the state then awarded the University of Akron this territory, and Kent was out and made a lot of people mad, and
Oh,
rightfully
yes.
so.
Yeah, it was supposed to be a Kent
That's
State
right.
extension down there too, but it wasn't very long until the powers that be had
That was a
Akron U.
legislative act. Even though I was with the University of Akron, I do have the sympathy with the people who worked so very, very hard on that, and unfortunately, it didn't work
Well,
out.
as we mentioned in our last interview, we went through it quite extensively with the political part and the Ed Mobleys and people that went to bat down at the legislature, but Representative Johnson had more clout than the rest
More
of them
clout.
did.
Representative Johnson was from Orville.
From Orville.
He was not from here.
That's correct.
And probably the Representative Johnson was of the same party as the governor, is that right, at that time?
Yes, that's, I believe. I believe he was, but I can't.
I don't
be
remember.
sure.
I don't know which party either one of the two was, but
It made a difference. He didn't get elected the next time anyway.
he didn't make it the next time. Wadsworth didn't vote for him. Tom, let's go a little bit to Tom again here. This is very interesting. You had a political life in town, and you didn't fall into it. You didn't walk into it. You're pretty well dragged into it. Can you tell us how that happened?
Well, I guess I was always interested in the city and in the politics of it, but not being able to do anything because we lived on Westview and that was in the township.
So you couldn't, you had
So all
no
I
voice.
could do was knock on doors, especially when Jack Summers went in as mayor and Sterling Sechrist as president of council. We wanted to get some things around. So anyway, I started to get involved at that time. And so eventually, and there we go wandering again, Westview was taken in to the city, but by that time I'd moved over to Westgate anyway. And so I just, they asked me to run one time, and against the family's objection, why I did anyway.
And what did you run for?
I ran for 4th Ward Councilman.
Against whom? Do you remember?
Well, he's gone, so I can say it. Guy Jackson.
Guy Jackson. Guy Jackson is dead. He was a barber in town.
He was a barber in town. Good friend
person.
of mine.
Yeah. Good friend of mine as
Yeah.
well. A nice person. He barbered for years right next to where Brenny's used to be, or on the corner of Broad Street, and not on the corner, but one or two doors up.
Well, he was there about where Mayor John Hanna's building is. He was in there, or was it by?
No, across the street, wasn't it?
Oh, yes, but before that.
Oh, before that, he was where?
Yeah, he and his brother Clarence.
Oh, Clarence was in there too? And they had a barber shop. That's all he ever did, wasn't it? He was a barber.
That's right, he was a barber. In those days, why, you stayed in your profession.
Why, surely.
And when Mike Motzko, he was always a barber, and so they did.
Yeah. So then you ran against Guy Jackson and you beat. Beat him.
I won. We
You
didn't
won.
beat her.
Okay, you won him. You won. You won. That's right. That's a good point. I like that because in Wadsworth we don't beat anybody. No one loses. Just the other person wins. That's all.
Right.
So you then became interested in politics.
Yeah.
You have a reputation for being a straight shooter, no flourish, no fluff, hard work, stay by the desk all the time, and spend no money. Is that correct?
We don't, I really don't like to be called the tightwad, but I was, I guess. But you just like to see where the money's being spent.
Since we're talking about saying things nicely, why don't we just say that you like to cling to the coin?
Yes.
You cling to
Yeah, I happen to be on the senior citizen board or commission right now, and they said they have two tightwads, the administrator and me.
And you.
Yeah.
Well, my wife Linda was city auditor while you were
Yes,
mayor.
that's
As you remember, we're going to get to the mayor's job here pretty soon. And she also is one of those tightwad people. And she had nothing but the finest comments about you because every penny, every single penny was taken care of. We aren't to the mayor's job yet. You became the president, or you became the ward council person.
Yeah, I stayed on as Ward 4 councilman, 2 terms.
2 terms. And during that period of time, something very significant happened in Wadsworth, and you were heavily involved with that. Can you tell us what that is?
When I was council on
Yes,
Ward 4?
Ward 4.
You'll have to give me a hint. I just don't recall right at the moment.
What about zoning and planning, the very thing that...
Well, zoning and planning, of course, was taken up about that time because we were the first city in Medina
County.
Not in Medina County, but in the state to have a planning commission.
Okay, all right, that was very significant.
Yes.
It happened during the time that you were the 4th Ward
It was
council.
in part of that time. It had started a little before that, if I recall, but maybe it was in that time.
Yeah, I think that if I read my history correctly, it was probably during the time that you were the 4th Ward council. And you were a heavy proponent of that, is that correct?
That's right, yes, indeed.
And tell us a little bit why you felt it was necessary to do some planning. And of course, you gave part of it away when you said that Fred Allen went down to Naples, Florida, and he wrote back for the planning plans. Why?
Well, because it was a plan. Instead of people putting a grocery store right in the middle of a
Residential district?
development, it was kept on the main streets, and the housing had to be a certain size lots in certain developments. And so it couldn't grow like Topsy, as you
Right.
might say. At one time, you could just do anything like they did in the township, even though now they're being more careful
They're being
with
more
that.
careful. But wasn't there a city in Medina County that was growing very rapidly at about that time, and there was concern because it grew like Topsy and
You mean like the northernmost part?
Northernmost
on
part,
the west
like
side,
Colin Brunswick.
Like called Brunswick,
Right.
Brunswick Hills, yeah.
I like to tell this story, not to bring my wife up in the second time, but she graduated from Brunswick High
Yes, she
School.
is as a Republican also.
She was, yes, she
Yes.
was, yes, and her family was.
Okay.
She graduated from Brunswick High School in 1958.
Mm-hmm.
Shortly after that, Brunswick began to grow. But when she graduated, there were only 52 people in her graduating
Is
class.
that right?
There are now in Brunswick 18 more school buses than there were people in her
Oh,
graduating
for
class.
heaven's sake, that is interesting, but about that same time, then people started moving out of Cleveland
Out of Cleveland.
and going to the suburbia, which not only in Cleveland, but Akron,
Surely.
all the people were moving out of the inner city.
And what you planned to do, or what you intended to do, and did very well, and this is what one of the telephone calls that came to me said, that Tom Cox was probably one of the strongest proponents for city planning, and he hasn't told you that, so that's why I'm asking you that question.
Well, there were many of us.
Many of them.
So it was a group that wanted this and looked into it and got plans and plats. See, the Planning Commission is really a misnomer. It's really a platting.
P-L-A-T-T-I-N-G.
P-L-A-T-T-I-N-G, yes, or P-L-A-T. And it goes as planning, but it doesn't go with the future planning. It takes care of, we hire people, experts to
do the future
do
planning.
things like that. And the allotting people also hire the architects to make the curves in the street and put in the thing. So it isn't just planning, it's platting, yeah.
Before we leave Fourth Ward and your career in Fourth Ward, tell us one other thing that happened while you were the Fourth Ward constable in the Fourth Ward.
Well,
What about a highway?
we were the recipients of, well, what about the highway? Well, the highway became College Street instead of 224. At that time, 224 was taken around the north side, which, of course, there were some people against moving the highway out. But it had to be. I mean, can you see, well, you're seeing it in Medina, yeah.
That's right.
With all these trucks and everything on 224 going right through the center of our town.
So you were heavily responsible in moving 224 north of the city.
No, that was the state. We were there, yes,
You were there,
helping
you're
and all
pushing.
that. Yeah, not fighting the movement of it.
That's right. And that was one of the things. And what about a hospital?
Well, the hospital came into being, and I surely want people to remember that Dr. Klotz was very strong on that, and I lived on Westview at the time when this first started. Only stayed there a couple of years, moved over into Fourth Ward then. But we got sewer, and we sadly needed it because our septic tanks were just not right. So because Doctor went around and got all the petitions to do this, then Aunt Grace Kuntz sold the 15 acres, I think it is, or if I'm not mistaken, for about $1,000 an acre, which was
Zero.
zero now. In fact, some of the people that are
$1,000 a
arguing
foot.
against things, I tell them why they sold the whole hospital land for less than you paid for one lot in that area. But so then the hospital was moved, and it started down on Pardee Street, I think in 1923 it opened.
1921.
1921? Well, I thought it was 23, but anyway.
21. As a matter of fact, the first two people born in the hospital were Wayne Crawford, not Wayne Crawford, his sister,
Okay.
Wayne's sister,
Yeah.
and Bob Clapper.
Oh, is
They're
that right?
1921.
Okay.
What was her name? It'll come to us in a couple of
Yeah.
minutes.
Well, then I'll have to apologize to my older brother who said it was in 1921, and I thought.
Yeah, you tell your older brother that he was
Yeah,
right.
okay. But anyway, the hospital then, of course, Charlie Jones was a great proponent of that, went around raising money and publicity and all that, and so the hospital was built.
Okay, before we go too much farther here, tell us Nevin John Murray Klotz, Dr. Nevin John Murray Klotz. It was a physician here in town, came in 1937, and he died probably in
71, I think.
71, yes. A tremendously good doctor, as a pilot, and did absolutely everything that anyone can do, and he was not afraid to take on anything. He was a fine person. Charlie Jones. Tell us about Charlie Jones. Charlie Jones lived to be 100 years old.
That's right, yeah. Well, he came over, he was a controller at Cyberlink
Rubber Company.
And so he was he was a Rotarian, a civic-minded man, and his big thing was the hospital. And they stayed with it for years after that. And going back to Nevin, you got to remember, he was a pharmacist before he became a physician and surgeon.
I didn't know that.
Yes.
He was a pharmacist first?
Yeah. You remember in the doctor's offices.
He had a pharmacist, yes.
You practically had a pharmacy in all the doctor's
Yes.
offices. But so he was a tremendous person, and like you say, would take anything on. Even sometimes if they were ill-fated, such as Lincoln Manor.
Yes.
He was in on that because he felt that it would go because people couldn't afford to stay in their homes, and when they got older, and then they would come to those places, and then they would leave Lyman Street or Highland Street, Highland Avenue, and let people, younger people, move in and start another family, as you see.
Why do you say that Lincoln Place was ill-fated, Tom?
Well, because it just cost too much money, I guess, and people may not have been quite ready for it, and so they had to go through well, I don't know, foreclosure, but anyway, it was taken over by another person. North Akron Savings and Loan was involved in that, and so it's gone through about 3 different owners, and now it's got down to the point where they paid enough for it that they can realize profits on it.
Right.
So it's not ill-fated as far as the development.
Right. It was an idea preceding its time.
That's right, yeah.
I'd like to tell a little story about Charlie Jones. I wish you were here to enjoy it, because he enjoyed my telling this story. I gave a talk at Rotary one time. Well, this is 15, 20 years ago. Well, when did Charlie die? Do you remember Charlie Jones? He was
Time goes so fast anymore as we get older, but I would say it was probably 4 to 5 years ago.
Okay, he was close to 100 at the time.
When you talked about it.
Yes, at the time that I gave a talk at Rotary. And I've forgotten exactly when it was, but I can pinpoint it even more accurately, that women had not yet joined Rotary.
That's right.
And they started the Rotary program, and in came Nora Bell Honnert to play the piano. And I happened to be sitting close to Charlie, and I said, somewhat in a low voice, to Bill Elsass, who was president at the time, or program chair or whatever, I said, oh, you have women coming in here now. And Charlie turned around to me and said, this Rotary Club hasn't gone to hell yet.
Yeah, I suppose that's happened in different places and organizations. But
of course, all Norabelle was going to do was play the piano. But this place hasn't gone to hell yet.
Well, I'm good. And now they have probably 3 members or so.
I think they have some. Oh, you're a Rotarian, aren't you?
No, I'm a Lion.
Oh, you're a Lion. I'm sorry. Okay,
Yeah,
I made that big mistake. Let's go back then to the hospital. You say that Charlie went around getting subscriptions or conscriptions for the hospital.
Pledges.
Nevin Klotz, Dr. Klotz, did quite a bit of the pushing. Who were some of the other physicians in town who were strong like, I mean,
Oh, Dr. Zwick.
Zwick was very strong with
Very
it.
strong on that.
How about Dr. Myra Johnson?
Myra, yeah, a good heart doctor too, she was. And you also had McGrew
Dr.
at
McGrew.
that time.
They needed a hospital in which to
Send her,
Send
well,
their
to
people.
modernize it. We needed
That's right.
something else besides the old
Cow barn.
stables.
Stables,
Yes,
mhm.
that the Ohio Match was good enough to give when they didn't need horses anymore. But they needed something new. I mean, it just wasn't,
Right.
like so many things, they say, well, we don't need it. Well, we don't need it that day. We need
you need it
things in the future.
in the future.
And so
Tell us your involvement with the hospital.
I had very little.
Well, come on, Tom.
No, I don't. I'd vote for things and push like that.
You didn't push a few pennies that way and a few bits
Didn't
of
have too many pennies. I remember Charlie Jones came to the Holmesbrook there, and of course we went along with what he wanted to do, even though we always talk funny about this. DH&L and Holmesbrook did not participate very much in the building. I mean, it was from outside contractors, and they brought in outside suppliers and things like that. Even though Woody was on the board at one time, that was Woody Powers with DH&L. So we'd do what we had to do. We'd knock on the doors, knock and talk for it. But,
How many doors did you knock on?
Oh, Lordy, I wouldn't know.
There are people who call to say that you probably spent a good half of your time knocking on doors for the hospital.
Oh, I don't think so. I appreciate the thought, but you didn't have half time to give to it.
But you knocked on a lot of
Well,
doors.
sure you did, along with so many other people in town.
Can you name some of the other people who did it?
No, I should have known ahead of time, and I could probably think of those people. But there were so many of the doctors and the doctors' wives, the hospital auxiliaries. So many people were.
My understanding from people who called said to me that you knocked on doors for 3 months straight. Is that right?
Well, I suppose I didn't keep track of time.
3 months straight. But other people do. So, you
Yeah,
know, and I'm so glad that we're having an opportunity here because, you know, the hospital just didn't get built.
No, it sure didn't. It was a lot of work had to go in, and of course, as I recall, we had to pass a levy too to do that.
Did you have anything to do with Ann Grace giving that property? And she might as well have given it to him because for $15,000, well,
No, the only thing I can see that I went to Ann Grace one time when I wanted to build a house and wanted to build up on the farm, and she said, no, I don't want to just have one house up there. I want to have something good. And so
Go to hospital.
it ended up at the hospital was the good thing.
she was a good person.
And,
Bless her heart.
Of course, I gave her credit also. She managed to get some sewer up the street there too. See, that sewer, we had some problems down at the bottom around Holmesbrook, and of course we don't like eminent domains and things like that. So we had problems with getting the easement to take the sewer down from the allotment there, or the hospital. And so we just went around the problem. Went where we could, took a little more sewer, but it goes right down Holmesbrook Creek and then back around. So,
Right.
but of course, by doing that, it was able to open up the rest of the farm up there too.
So that helped out tremendously in more than one way then.
Yes, it opened up Leatherman Road then.
Is there anything more you want to say about the hospital before I ask you one more question about the hospital?
Well, no, except there are pictures in this book here.
What picture?
Well, I'd have to look it up of the old hospital,
I mean,
and then the new one.
A new hospital.
Yeah.
But what about when the hospital was first built? What did you do down there? Were you on the board?
No.
What did you do?
Oh, I don't know.
Were you a volunteer?
Well, sure, you volunteered.
Sure. As if it were nothing.
Well,
How much volunteering did you do at the hospital, Tom?
Well, not a lot. I was on different committees, and one time I was on the township and the Brittman Township.
That's one that I was trying to get you to talk about. Tell us the really serious problems that you had when you were on the Rittman and Wadsworth, what is it, Milton Township? Milton Township and Wadsworth Township and Wadsworth City. The serious problems that came up out of that.
Oh, gosh, Caesar. Well, the paying for it, of course, was one big thing that we had to do.
Who had to take the leadership role to get that thing going the right direction, to keep the arm hairs down?
Well, let's see. His name's out there. The Rittman man, you mean?
No, I'm talking about the Wadsworth man. His name is Tom Cox.
Oh, no. No, he was there, but...
You were chair, weren't you?
Well, yeah, but...
You get credit for, according to the people who talked to me, that had you not been there with your very peaceful way of doing things, that there would have been fur flying most of the time.
Well, I've tried to do that in a lot of places, to keep two factions from fighting so much. And usually when you can get them together, why, they know more than I ever knew, but to get them to use their heads. So yeah, I did some of that.
You did a lot of that, Tom.
But,
I knew this was going to be difficult to get these things out
well,
of you, but...
you know, I told you last time, I don't keep track of these things.
Other people do.
You go on and do something else.
Let's go from Ward 4 to your next councilmatic involvement.
Well, let's see. I think the next one, I became president of council.
President of council.
Yes.
And do you remember one of your star council people during your presidency?
Well, I remember Mike Jones was very good. He was our finance chairman, and Bob
Foster.
Bob Foster. Bob Foster, I remember I took plans over for our new water plant. And he and Mike went over these things, and I'm told by the people in Columbus that designed it that they probably saved some $50,000.
They were good people.
By going over. I remember I went into General Tire, and Bob got all these engineers around it, took the plans over, and they looked, and of course not while I was there, but then they looked things over and found not flaws but suggestions.
Yeah.
And
Now, Mike Jones is still living.
no, Mike died within the past year and a half.
Oh, did he? And Bob Foster died.
Bob Foster died in Ireland. He and his wife were on a sojourn.
His wife was a school teacher, Ann Foster, was a school teacher in Norton.
And lives in the Great Oaks
Great Oaks
now.
Development. Do you remember any other council people during the time that you were president?
Well, we have our present mayor, John Hanna, was on, a very
council.
young man at that time.
Yes.
And
Can't remember anybody else.
I'll think of them in a minute.
You're looking at one of them.
Yeah, that's right. I was trying to look at the picture. Yeah, Caesar. That's right. You sat on, I brought that up last time because you were our reader of the legislation, which we had to read at that time.
Every single solitary word.
22 pages at one time.
22 pages of one on sexual harassment or something like that.
I don't know what it was
That's horrible.
about because most of us fell asleep while you were reading.
Well, I was
we really
reading.
didn't. So long.
You were president of council for 2 terms, and you were unopposed the second time, were you not?
Yes, that's right.
And do you know why you were unopposed?
No, I don't know. I guess you didn't want to run against me.
I don't think that's actually particularly accurate. I would not have run against you because I thought you had done a very, very fine job.
You were busy in Akron, too.
Yeah. The university wouldn't permit me to. As a matter of fact, after my second term on council.
I just said that.
The second term on council, the university would not permit me. They couldn't stop me, but they suggested strongly that I not become involved with politics because with so many of our well, all of our money comes from the government, and there might have been a conflict of interest. So they asked that I not do that, which was perfectly okay with me. But one of the underlying reasons was that you did have a sense of, and I'll say this for you, Tom, all politics notwithstanding, you have a sense of propriety. I mean, what's right is right. Regardless who's there, who's not there, what's right is right. Now, are you political? Yes. Am I political? Yes. But that made no difference. The fact is that's right for Wadsworth and it's going to be done this way, and you were there. The other thing that I think people really admired about you was that you spent time.
Oh, lots of time, yeah.
And I mean, you were always around. You were really, really there. And
I felt you had to be there to know what was going on.
I think
and
that's
I
right.
did try to spend as much time as I could.
I don't think people quite understand how much time is involved. They think, well, you go to 2 meetings a month.
Yeah.
Well,
No, that doesn't happen. In fact,
that's like saying that, your house is always clean because I go there twice a month and it's clean. Well, how much you have to clean it before you get there?
Yeah, it was very important that we keep the people together, and also I believed in, maybe my council meetings ran too long, but to give the people of the city the time that they needed. There were times when we had so many at public hearing things, we had to limit their talk. But
Well, limit.
do you remember the time when Jim Madigan came up?
Oh, surely.
And gave a real Shakespearean episode about Lincoln Manor.
Yes. I also remember the time that they wanted to, the people in the north end of town, I forgot which, like Longview and Franks, not Franks, but Orchard and all of that place, were concerned about the business strip that was going to go out there in front because a man wanted to come in to put a trucking company or something.
That's right.
And oh, mercy, did they become angry. And as a matter of fact, I happened to, trying to think of how I was involved with that, but I know that meeting lasted until 11:30 at night.
Yeah, they did.
So those things happen.
So.
Who was mayor when you were council president the second time, Tom?
Earl Gottwald.
Earl Gottwald. And Earl, a good friend of all of ours, and we try to get him on the program, but unfortunately he's not well enough to do so.
His health is not.
Health is very, very bad, but he had to retire. And why did he retire? Not because he was sick at that time.
Well, that was in his second term. He had to retire because his wife took a job with, she worked at B&W and they had to go to Lynchburg.
Lynchburg, Virginia.
And so they decided that better follow her job.
So she went down there. They went down there. They came back later, of course.
Yes, that's right.
And you became mayor.
Well, I became mayor. Tony Perry took as president of council at that time. I was not president of council at that time. And so Tony took it on the interim, and then Everett Perkins and I filed to run for the unexpired.
Oh, okay.
That's
You
the way
ran
that
for the
worked.
unexpired term.
I was not president. I'd only stay, I'd always believed, okay, we'll go on council and we'll stay there a couple of years and then get new ideas and come back if people wanted you, and go another 4 years and then stay out a while and then go back and do another 4 years as I did councilman in Ward 2. But so I became mayor at that time.
Okay. During your tenure as mayor, do you remember some of the most important things that assailed you almost immediately?
Well, I think one of them was the downtown renovation.
Oh, boy. And tell us about what downtown used to look like as compared to what it looks like now, and all of the problems that you had, and who the person was with whom you had to deal.
Well, how do I want to start it? I did kind of want to go over the downtown, like from the 40s and 50s on, maybe, tell people a little bit about, for instance, some of the merchants got together, and you may not remember, but they had it was a Minch building, but Bert Kuppelberger lived there.
Oh, surely.
And they tore that house down.
The house down.
Next to Wright Drive.
I told the story about Bert Kuppelberger with his cane with a bullet on the bottom of it, a blank, and he would bang it on the sidewalk.
And yeah, he was a carpenter contractor. But that was torn down, and some of the merchants said they would pay for it. And they did. They allotted themselves. It wasn't done real formally. And eventually, I think the city had to pay the last couple payments on it there. And then going up the street, why, you had Harv Gross's, or John Gross's butcher shop that was in there. A lot of this place where Western Auto was, and now it's the Amschutz furniture. And we had the George Baker's pool hall, and we went up the steps to get into that. And then we moved on up and had Sterling Drug, I believe it was, had the drugstore there, and then Isley's that Harry Wyrath eventually
But
bought.
didn't Goldstein have the drugstore?
Goldstein had it, yeah, after.
G&H Drug?
Yeah, G&H after the one I'm talking about.
After Sterling?
But at least it was a drugstore. We can't go through all the owners and things
Right.
like that. And the Miller Jones Shoe Store, and
Shook was the,
yes, Floyd Shook had that.
Floyd Shook. Is he still living?
No,
He's
not.
dead. Mhm.
And anyway, then we go up the corner where Ladrick's was, and earlier, why it was Ike Vale's cigar store and Mark Nielsen's
Jewelry store.
jewelry store, and then around the corner, the barber shops that I'm talking about. Mike Moscow was downstairs, and the theater, and the restaurant or bar. Of course, that's something else. I don't know what it is now. And at one time, we had the news banner where the M&S
Auto Parts.
is. And across the street, why, of course, we had the library.
It was an old brown house.
Yes.
Ella Everhard.
That's right. And I know we can't spend too much time on downtown.
No,
but,
we need to know this.
But anyway, across the street then we had, Trent Taylor's and Smith
How about going down from the library to Brenny's?
All right,
Because that's all vacant now.
No, you had Clyde Weltzing's, and it's still there, Norabel's
Wadsworth Auto Parts.
Wadsworth Auto
And he used
Parts.
to be across the street, right?
He was across the street, yeah, and where the gas station is part of that, Mench's gas station, he was in there. So we went across, and one thing that might be noted, we used to have a diner. And
Right
the
there.
diner at one time was on the corner of the Marathon gas station and
Broad and Lyman.
Street, and they moved it over to the north side of Broad Street there. So we did have a restaurant there, and that lasted quite a while. And then we had Bill Daig's father, Hudson dealership, and then finally into Brenneman's. Oh, we had what they called the Hunky Bakery, too.
Yeah, that George, the Greek fellow, I don't know George's last name, paid us or something.
I
What was
don't know it either, but they've had a good bakery there.
a good bakery.
Yep.
And then there's a Trent the Tailor was right next door.
Yeah, that was upstairs and
Yeah.
downstairs. There wasn't anything on the ground
that's
level. It
right.
either went down
Or up, right.
Up, yeah. And then around the Brenneman's, then around the corner, why, of course, we had B's Dress Shop.
Lee Vinnick, Binnick from Akron,
That's
used to own that.
Had B's Dress Shop, and eventually Earl Gottwald was in there. But you got to remember, we had the Acme grocery store.
We did
years
indeed.
Before that. Yeah.
And the man's name with the Acme grocery store was Mosher.
Mosher.
Bob Mosher's father, Bob Mosher, now has the
Knapp's.
Firestone.
Yeah. And so we went on up the street and had the Northern Ohio Telephone
Company, and upstairs, the Star.
Upstairs, that's
It used to be
right.
the Star Telephone Company upstairs.
Telephone before that.
And not Helenitas, but what was her name, was a telephone operator, and so was Mrs. Murray.
Well, Winnie Dakin was up there.
Winnie
too,
Dakin.
An old one. And, but then, of course, we had, before Huntington Bank went up there, we had Dr. Miller's office and home. And then right beside that, I think Bill Kane lived there at one time.
I didn't know that Bill Kane lived there. That's
Then
good to
it was
know.
taken for the City Hall.
City Hall.
And then back across the street, why...
The hotel,
The hotel, and...
Park Hotel.
Park Hotel.
And behind that, a couple of veterinarians.
Well, it was at the Kreider's, the
Kreider's.
Kreider Hotel, and then Dr. Kreider had his veterinarian there. And then that was all taken down for the Ben Franklin store, or what's now Ritzman and Holmesbrook Hardware. And so just to tell you, those things went on. We had Tubasing's on the corner. Was one time at Gensimer's.
I mean, it was Wright's department store.
Right
though.
department store. Before that was Gensimer's, and
Tubasing's was there before?
Tubasing's came
Later.
They were the last ones.
And then just north of Tubasing's was Hoagland Hardware, which is now a craft shop.
Craft shop.
And next to that was Bob's Cafe, Bob Sandel's.
That's right.
And that's now
Bixler.
Bixler's Electric. And then around the corner from that,
Then around the corner, we had furniture stores, we had gas stations, on Merriman's gas station.
and then Joe Bender's
Joe
restaurant.
Bender's restaurant, and then Bob Siffort's had a garage there, and that's all been taken down for the Knapp's Firestone. And
Right.
of course, we had a little alleyway that went back through there called Bender Court, and that was an interesting place because they had some old buildings back there, but that was all taken down. And I remember when they burned it down, Ford Coleman was so upset. Right beside the church there, and he wanted that building kept as a memorial. But I said, Ford, are you going to buy it? He says, no. So
It went down. You were mayor at the time, right?
no, that was just on council.
Council. Then across the street, and this is extremely interesting to have all of these stores. Across the street, the last store was Bixler's before he moved, wasn't it?
As the store, we also had the gas station.
Gas station,
Vance
Nicodemus's
Baldwin
and Vance Baldwin's.
gas station.
Then Bixler's, and then Wolf's Department Store.
Wolf's Department Store.
And then the theater.
And the Star Theater. And then we had the restaurant, Bill Kleckner's restaurant. And on up, then we had Kroger's,
Kroger's store.
A&P right beside
Right beside each other. A&P was the big, long one, and Kroger's was a small one. You had to go
That's right.
upstairs to get there. And then the bank
Well,
building.
you had Bill Lester's and John Long.
Oh, that's right,
Williams,
that's
so
right.
That's where you went upstairs.
That's right, exactly.
So anyway, then we
And then around the corner from the bank was the city loan, wasn't it?
City Loan, but we had Curtis Menswear.
Curtis Menswear there
I gotta
also.
remember years ago, we had 2 men's stores, ladies' stores, tube of things, 3 hardwares
Yeah.
for 6,000 people.
People didn't go away from here,
No.
though.
And,
Charlie Cooter said he had never been to Akron until he was an adult, and he was 94 years old now.
So I did want to go through some of those
Oh,
things.
absolutely. Then we had the 5 and 10 cent store down there,
5
bank, and then the
before they
5 and
moved
10.
up there, and First National Bank before it went up where they are now, which is Huntington Bank. And
2 hardware stores.
yeah, Dick's and Prince Keller Coons, made a living. And the B&B, used to be able in high school, you could go over there and buy 3 candy bars for a dime.
dime.
My first wife and I would split our nickels together and get 3 that
3
way,
of them.
rather than buying for a nickel apiece. So.
That's good thinking.
So anyway, that I just did want to bring up some of the
And Alan
downtown. We always go close to this Mench's building, or we had. It's quite a famous thing. We think it's famous in Wadsworth because Laura Spellman was born there. Now Laura Spellman became John D. Rockefeller's wife.
And that's included in the history of Wadsworth.
Yes,
But where was she born? Do you remember?
Well, it was right there about where the parking lot is now, in that area.
Of what?
Right beside the school.
Right next to the
Yeah,
school.
I talked about Bert Couple-Burgers.
Right.
Menches owned the house, but Bert lived there.
And that's where she was
I'm
born?
not sure whether it was there or next door. It was back in, 1830s?
Something like that. But she became Mrs. John D. Rockefeller.
Yeah.
That's true.
He was a merchant, and eventually he went to Akron, and then did have, they called him one of the first chains. So anyway.
Let's get to your mayor's position. We could probably spend days here with you because you've had such a
Well,
long...
we go around, but one
that's
thing,
good.
I'll have to tell you some of the things when we've done the downtown renovation. Mrs. Hoagland, who owned the...
Ruth Hoagland.
Ruth Hoagland, where the craft shop is, and Bixler's. We tried to get her to sign, because we needed so many of the merchants to sign, and she couldn't. She said, I've renovated this downtown a couple times. I'm not going to do it the third when I'm 90 years old.
And she's the type of person who could say it
so
very
she did.
firmly. Now, she's still living, Ruth Hoagland's still living, she died.
But my son-in-law, Tom Hudson, and his brother and Dwayne Kreider bought the building. And then we had enough signers to get the downtown renovation going. And so that was hard. I've got it marked down. It's hard to sell, and the merchants had to pay for it. The city had to pay their part too. But the city did a lot, but had to be done anyway. It was the sewers that we had to put sewers in, and that they've been there forever. And another thing that we did, and you were there, the labor contract. It's the first time that we ever
Had a strike with the policeman.
Yeah, the police contract always had a labor lawyer. And I was there and I said, I'm not going to negotiate with somebody that's a professional, so we hired a professional. And it worked out quite well. I think we got a better contract for both people. And you remember on council we had quite a bit of controversy over oil wells.
Oh, yes, I sure do remember that.
But anyway, to cut it down a little bit, why we put lots of restrictions on oil wells, but then the city had some good property that had oil wells. Could have it down by the airport.
That's right.
And so we saved an awful lot of money for gas by drilling those, even though we only took our portion of it there.
Right. We got gas free as a result of
Got gas free for the municipal building and for up at the powerhouse and I think the rec hall, different one. But anyway, we used it all up and it's gone now. We started the EMS program.
I was going to ask you to talk about the EMS program.
Yeah, that was something as I recall, it was a 0.4 of a mill levy. I mean, the proponents, they wanted a lot more, but Jim Leadham and I thought we could probably do with less. Again, there we're trying to save money, but Chet Fish went up and bought an old used ambulance from Bricksville, I believe it was. So anyway, we got it underway and it was in the fire station, and I remember interviewing people, and we had a lot of volunteers that did come, and we interviewed them to be EMS people. And I remember I used to drive ambulance for Hilliard Funeral Home.
That was your uncle, wasn't it?
Yes. But finally the restrictions came so heavy from the state that they couldn't do it anymore.
Who were some of the very first EMS people?
Well, of course we had Chet Fish, and we had Dick Hunter was on at that time, and
Joe Klosterman?
Joe Klosterman, and Ken Darmore. I wish I'd write some of these down to give these people credits for hanging in there until it really got underway. And so that was a very important part of our town, which is still going very strong.
Right. As we continue with your mayor's tenure.
We did the cable TV contract.
That's right. Okay, I wanted to make sure we got that one in.
Yeah, that was something, and we had hired consultants from Washington, which really, I've heard the story from Steve Fry. He said, I don't know what we're even doing out here. They're so tough. But the restrictions we had, and by the way, their contract comes up here in either this year or next year.
Yeah, we wouldn't be sitting here right now doing this show had you people not done that.
That's right, and so it's been a very good thing, and
You bet it
especially
has.
this part of it. And I see we're running out of time, but we also had Quadrille Drive. We took that into the city.
Quadrille Drive now encompasses 2 or 3 big companies.
Edner, Parker Hanovan, Suprema, and we had to have hearings on that. And I always remember Ralph Rohr kept coming into my office saying, when are we going to get the money? Well, of course, it wasn't up to us to get the money, but he owned it and had sold it to Pace Pontiac in Akron, and then he sold it to the Quad.
Ralph Rohr lives in Worcester now, doesn't he?
I think so.
Yeah, he's 90 years old. His wife, Inez, just died.
Oh, is that right?
Both of them were teachers in Wadsworth. She was
Well, I'm not
Inez
going to have
Goodman.
enough time. I want to mention about the cemeteries.
Well, go ahead, please.
The first Mennonite church was out on at Fran Ellen Heights, which is across from the hospital, and that's where they had their first church before they moved into where the Episcopal church is now, and had a cemetery there. And Fran Ellen allotment was named for Frank and Helen Leatherman.
Leatherman, right.
Developed it. And my great-grandfather had 2 boys that are buried there. That's how I became acquainted with it. One was very young, infant, and the other one was a little older.
Tom, we could go on forever with you. And we are going to have you back with another group of people very, very shortly. So thanks again for spending another hour with us and giving us all that you have.
I had 3 seconds. Go to see that book at the library.
Right, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tom.
Okay, you're welcome.